Okay, once again, good afternoon, everybody. I know I have some people that are just getting settled in. My name is Leanne Foster, and I am with the Provider Outreach and Education area here at WPS. And today I'd like to welcome you to our session on PECOS Basics. Now, today we are going to be covering basic functionality of PECOS. We are not going into the identity and access portion of PECOS. We did do that in a webinar recently, and a little bit later on I will have that information placed in the chat for you. But today we're going to talk about how to start an application, a little bit of the navigation of PECOS. If you're not submitting applications electronically, you're doing so through paper. And paper applications, it's a lengthy template that you fill out. It has to be printed off. It has to be mailed to us. And it actually takes longer to process a paper application than it does an electronic application. And PECOS, which is our provider enrollment chain and ownership system, is the only method to submit an electronic enrollment application. So our objective today is to help get you more comfortable with PECOS and help provide you with an understanding of how to start and manage an application in that system. To do that, we are going to give a little bit of an overview of the registration process, but as I mentioned, that has a webinar in and of itself, and we will provide that information to you if you'd like to learn a little bit more about that. We're also going to talk about how you access the system and how you navigate through the system, just the basic layout of it. And then we're going to talk about starting common application types. This is going to include uploading documents and applying signatures to those applications. So I want to start out with a little bit of a PECOS overview. We did get some pre-submitted questions that were even just asking what PECOS is. So PECOS is again that provider uh, enrollment, chain and ownership system. And it is really the first step in claims processing. You need to be enrolled in the Medicare program in order to submit claims and bill Medicare for reimbursement. And the enrollment record is really the repository for all enrollment data. Everything we know about a given provider is contained in PECOS, and PECOS drives our claims processing system. So when I say it has all of the data, it includes things like eligibility information, not from a beneficiary standpoint, but from a provider standpoint. So think of things like licensure, certification, education levels. All that information that is included on a paper application is also part of PECOS. We also ask about your address information. We need to know where you're going to be seeing patients. We ask for a special payments address because while we might not issue paper checks, we do send out other communications from a claims level perspective that are required to go out to a specific address, and it's that special payments address. So we ask for that information. Practice locations, claims are feed based off of the geographic location that they are provided in. So what's the cost of providing that service in a particular geographic location? Those physician fee schedules that you may or may not be familiar with for reimbursement of claims are all based off of those practice locations. We also need to know about ownership and managing control. Provider enrollment is also a fraud and abuse prevention tool, in which we are a little bit of the gatekeepers to that Medicare trust fund. The best way to ensure that that trust fund is there for generations to come is to prevent those that would do the Medicare trust fund harm from gaining access to those funds in the first place. And when we're talking about a group or an organization, we're talking about owners and managing controls personnel being the individuals that have access to those funds. Reassignments. Reassignments are going to be typically with a medical clinic, and it's going to be the doctors that work for that particular clinic that are reassigning benefits to their organizations. And then also, of course, PECOS houses the provider transaction access numbers or PTANs that you will get once you have successfully completed the provider enrollment process. And as I said earlier, it drives the claims processing system. A provider does not exist in our claims adjudication systems without first coming through PECOS. And they can get there through a paper application, but it is much more efficient if it comes into us electronically through PECOS. It's a little bit of a direct link to that. There are advantages to submitting electronically. Certainly it's something to get used to if you've always submitted on paper, but by submitting electronically, you'll actually experience faster application processing times. An application, whether that's an initial, whether that's a change, whether it's a revalidation, if we have all of the information that's required for that application action, we are required to process that within 15 calendar days. Development can certainly lengthen that, but if it's what we refer to as a clean application, it's 15 calendar days. Submitting through paper, it's 30. It's double the time because there's a lot of automations that we can take advantage in PECOS that we cannot take advantage of with a paper application. Submitting electronically also offers you the ability to view your finalized enrollment data. So what we have in our claims adjudication systems, you can actually see through PECOS. That also helps you know whether or not there's any changes that need to occur. It's also going to make revalidation a little bit easier. It is a simpler application completion because it works a lot like the do-it-yourself tax submission software. It asks you questions about your scenario and then it customizes that application so it's only presenting you with the sections that we need information for. Whereas with a paper application, it will tell you, but it's giving you a list and you will have to answer questions throughout to ensure that you're completing all of the sections. PECOS bolts those together, if you will, because it's a scenario-driven application or enrollment process, and you won't be able to miss a section. You may be able to provide us with missing information, but you're not going to be able to completely omit a required section. The system has edits in place for that. Because of that, it does reduce the amount of the opportunity for development or the likelihood of us needing to develop for additional information. I'm not saying it eliminates it. There are things that can occur, but it can significantly reduce the development that you see. It also eliminates postage for you. With a paper application, you have to pay postage and send that mail. It cannot be faxed or emailed. So there is a cost savings there for you as well. So there are multiple actions available in PECOS. Providers are able to do their initial enrollment, whether that is to Medicare or to a particular jurisdictional state. They can submit their initial enrollment applications for that P10. They can also make changes to existing enrollment information along with revalidating. And that's that 5-year process where CMS asks providers to re-verify or revalidate all the information currently on their enrollment record. A provider, whether they're an individual or an organization, can manage reassignments here. From an individual perspective, they can add employers or who they reassign to, but employers or organizations can actually start and add reassignments for additional doctors through their organizational enrollments as well. Simplifies that process a little bit. You can submit all paper application and provider types here. So that means the CMS 855I, the CMS 855B, the 855R, and the 855O. All of those applications can be submitted through PECOS. Now, they're not necessarily going to call out that they're that application type, but again, remember that customized enrollment-based scenario is going to bolt together those pieces. And in essence, you are submitting those forms, even if you're not necessarily seeing those form identifiers inside PECOS. Also, all provider types, so individuals, organizations, suppliers. When I say suppliers, think clinical labs, ambulance services, independent diagnostic testing facilities. But they can all submit that way. Our our Part A providers, so hospitals, critical access hospitals, swing bed units, they can all submit their enrollment through PECOS as well. Some of those facilities are going to be required to pay an enrollment fee, and they're able to pay their enrollment fees electronically through PECOS at the same time that they're submitting those applications. So there's a lot of capabilities here. To get started, in order to submit the first time, the provider is going to need to create an account, and we're going to talk about that a little bit here on the next slide. But they need to create an account in order to gain their national provider identifier. They're going to create that account for MPES and for PECOS. So if you have a provider, or you are a provider who has an MPI, you actually already have your PECOS user ID and password. That user ID and password works for both systems to make this a little bit more streamlined and a little bit easier. But it does require a user ID and password. There's login information, and that's because of the sensitive information that is included in the PECO system. So information that you need in order to get started, you're going to need the identifying information for the providers, you're going to need the MPI for the providers, and you're going to need contact information. So everything that we would ask for on a paper application, you're going to need that same information to do it electronically. Now, that's the first time. After you submit an application through PECOS the first time, a lot of that information is going to carry over because PECOS is already going to know you and know some information about you. You'll still have to answer questions, but it will get more streamlined as time goes on. Also, you can set up connections when you are getting that user ID and password. We did get some questions on this. You can set up connections for authorized officials. Now, when I talk about authorized officials in the context of getting started with PECOS, it's an authorized official for what's referred to as the Identity and Access Management System, which is where you access your user ID and password. That user ID and password is going to ask for is going to allow you into a system where you're going to be able to set up staff users and surrogates. So if you're a credentialing office, you're going to be able to have those staff work on behalf of your group, your organization. That's what authorized official means in the context of getting started with PECOS. That is very different from the enrollment process. I just want to call that out. As part of an enrollment application, an authorized official is somebody who can sign on behalf of the organization to set up that PTAM. Oftentimes, the authorized official in the Identity and Access System and PECOS are the same, but they do not necessarily need to be. They aren't always the same. So this is that Identity and Access Management System. I've included a link. This is a system where you're setting up that user ID and access, and there are some tools. The image that you see on the right has a quick reference guide and a frequently asked question for setting up that access. Now today, as I mentioned, we are not focusing on this particular system. We did just do a webinar on that, but I am asking Ashley to place into the chat a link to an encore for that identity and access system, and it's an encore titled Getting Started with PECOS Access. That is actually going to walk you through setting up this user ID and password and setting up those staff user and surrogate connections along with that authorized official. So if you're looking for information regarding that, I encourage you to check that out. So once you have that user ID and access, you are going to be going into PECOS itself. You have to enter your user ID and password in order to access that. Now here's a screenshot of what that login page looks like, but I just want to show you where that is. So easiest way to get there is going to be from the CMS website. You can Google PECOS, but from the CMS website just ensures you get to the right URL. If you go under the drop-down for Medicare and you go to Enrollment and Renewal and the Provider and Supplier option from that menu, you'll come to CMS's Become a Medicare Provider or Supplier page. From here, there is a Medicare enrollment for providers and suppliers option on the left, and there you will find a link to the system. There's a lot of other great information. There's information about revalidation. We got a couple of questions on that. And then also there's a link to pay that fee outside of PECOS. But here is the PECOS system. And this is what that page is going to look like. You'll enter your user ID and password. I am not going to be able to demo this because this is a live system and I am not a Medicare provider, but I am going to show you, give you a peek of what it looks like inside using the slides that we have coming up. One thing I do want to point out, I did mention that identity and access system. This is also where you can register to be a user. This is going to take me away from PECOS. This is that identity and access system. And down below here are those resources that I mentioned. One second, there we go. You do have a couple of options here. Obviously, signing in, you can reset your user ID and password if you're having issues with that. There's information for that. But also, I want to point out there are resources here. Now, we're going to talk through some of these today, but there are resources for particular functions or processes inside of PECOS. There are tutorials based on application type. These can be a really good resource as you're getting started, and they are broken up by individual and organizational provider. I just wanted to make sure you were aware those were out there. So once you are in PECOS, you want to start your application. From there, once you log in, you are going to come to a page that looks like what you see here on the right. What this is the My Associates page. This is where you get started. You have the My Associates button, you have account management, and you have the revalidation notification center. We're going to talk about the revalidation notification center in a little bit later, but it is there, and this is basically your home page. Under My Associates, that's item A here on your screen. That's where you will initiate or be able to initiate all application types, whether you are an initial enrollment starting for the first time, whether you're making changes, whether you're doing revalidations, whether you're deactivating a provider. That can all happen there. Uh, you can also see your accounts or your application status. Now it's going to be the status inside the PECOS system. We do also have an option on our website for you to check the status, particularly if it's in development, but you can see all of your status. When we change a status in PECOS, usually within the next 24 hours, you are going to be able to see it on your side of PECOS. The MAC side, unfortunately, and the provider side sides of PECOS do look a little bit different, but our CSRs, we do work with them to ensure that they're able to assist you with your side of PECOS. It just looks a little different because there's more information, more actions we need to be able to execute on our side. Item B is that revalidation center, and I mentioned that we will talk about that. Item C here, that's going to be applications requiring signatures. So if you have an application that needs to be signed by an authorized official in the context of an enrollment application process, sometimes we'll get questions about how do they start their signatures. It will be located in that item C, so any applications that need an outstanding signature, they're going to be able to sign there. D is going to be account management. So that's going to be if you have to update account information as far as an email address, contact information, password. If you need to change the password, that's going to take you back out to that INA system. And then item E, those same tutorials, those same guides that we discussed on the previous slide are also available once you access the PECOS system. So now I want to walk you through some of the basic enrollment types that you'll see. And we're going to start with an initial application. Now once you go into My Associates, you'll see kind of a streamlined version of this page. We'll show you what existing enrollments look like here in a second. But if you're submitting an initial application, or if this is the first time that you have tried to submit an application through PECOS, even if you are an established provider, and we'll talk about that more in a few minutes, this is what this page is going to look like. Anytime you have not submitted an application ever through PECOS, through the user ID and password that you have set up, you are going to see just the initial enrollment option. And that is because it takes at least one application to connect PECOS to our enrollment data and allow you access. That is for security reasons. When you set up with the identity and access system, it doesn't necessarily know which enrollment records you should have access to. The application is that connection between your side of PECOS and what the MACs see in PECOS, which is that enrollment information. So to start an initial application, you're going to click on the box that's highlighted there in red with the red box around it, create initial enrollment application. This is again going to be for anybody who's new to Medicare, anyone who's using PECOS for the first time, and then it's going to take you through a scenario questionnaire and it's going to ask you to select a territory. So a couple of things here. That questionnaire is what's bolting together the required sections um, for the application in order to execute your enrollment application. And then selecting a territory is super important because that is what's going to direct your submission to the appropriate MAC. So make sure when you're selecting the territory, you're selecting the state for which the provider application needs to go to. So if you're enrolling in Michigan, select Michigan, even if you're located in Indiana. If you are trying to get a Michigan PTAN, you need to let us know that so that it goes to the appropriate bucket, if you will, inside PECOS for us as a MAC to process that. If you have an existing enrollment, things are going to look a little bit different. So this is an existing associate. If you scroll down on that My Associates page, you are going to be able to search or view all of your enrollments. Now this page has been redacted, so it doesn't have provider information, but you will see listings for organizations or individuals. And here you can see there is a record there, but again, I've redacted that. You're going to be able to search if you have many, and if you're a surrogate or a staff user, you might be able to see many different enrollment records inside of PECOS, but you can search for those. This is going to be important if you're starting a change or a reassignment or a deactivation, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But underneath the organizations or individuals, depending what you have access to, there's going to be a button that allows you to look at the enrollments. You're just going to see the name and the tax IDs out here. You have to go into that view enrollment in order to see that information. If you are a surrogate or a staff user and you are not seeing the organizations or the individuals that you work with, typically that is something that has to go back to that INA system, that identity and access system, and you have to request access to those providers, and those requests need to be approved by the authorized official listed in the identity and access system in order to make that connection. So if you're not seeing something, it goes back to your user ID and access. Once you hit the view enrollments for a particular organization or an individual, you're going to see a screen not dissimilar to this. Individuals, organizations, it looks very much the same. It just has different, might have a different specialty. It could have a different title for the organization. It will show a different enrollment type, but it is set up the same way. From here, you can do a couple of things. You can either view the enrollment. You'll see that with that marker of A there, it's pointing up to the approved enrollment. You can view your approved enrollment record. This is super helpful if you need to verify what addresses are on file, or if it's time to revalidate and you want to see if anything needs to change. You can also look at what reassignment or ownership information is out there. Everything that we have finalized in our records, you would be able to see. Down below, you'll see item B. You can see if there are any reassignments for a provider. Here you can see the number 15 for existing reassignments, and then there's pending reassignment applications of 4. What that tells me is this organization has 15 active reassignment PTANs, and there are 4 reassignment applications that have been submitted through the group enrollment that are pending for them. They're not completed yet, so you can see all of that. Over to the right, you're going to see three buttons by the bubble that says See. You can view your enrollment information here as well, so you have a couple of ways to do that. You can start a revalidation application for this provider from here, and then under More Options, you can start change of information applications. You can also start revalidation. So there's a multitude of ways to start revalidations. You can deactivate a provider, or you can initiate an initial enrollment for this provider. Typically, that's going to be if you have to start them in a different state. But all of your enrollment actions are going to um, initiate off of the existing enrollments when you have a provider that already exists in our system and has submitted electronically previously. This includes change of information applications, and this is where we get a lot of questions because we do have providers that have maybe never submitted electronically before, and we're going to talk about that. But an existing provider is going to access their My Associates page, and that's going to allow them to access the appropriate enrollment that they want to make changes on. And I keep saying appropriate enrollment because you will have providers that have multiple enrollments. You may have an organization that has multiple enrollment records because of jurisdictional state. You can see all of their states in their one record. It could be that's just how they were set up pre-PECOS. Providers sometimes were given multiple enrollments due to practice locations. We've tried to minimize that in the last 10, 15 years, but there are going to be some of those older records that are still going to be set up that way. So when you're trying to make a change, you do need to make sure that you're looking at the appropriate enrollment when you're accessing your My Associates, and then you're going to go into that and select the change option. From there, once you're in there, you're going to update the topics. So instead of application sections in PECOS, those sections are referred to as topics. So if you have to update, say, a practice location, you're going to select that practice location topic and make the appropriate updates. If this is the first time that this provider has submitted electronically and they're trying to make a change, they are going to be submitting what looks like an initial enrollment. It's not. It's going to look like an initial enrollment. It is going to ask you to fill out all of the sections this one time. Remember earlier I said that that electronic submission is what connects your PECOS user ID and access, or user ID and password, that access, to what we currently have in our enrollment records system. It will come through as an initial, but our analysts are trained to see that as a change. They are looking for the fact that that provider exists. They're just trying to change information, and we will process it as a change. However, on your end, that first time, if the provider's always submitted through paper, it's going to look like an initial enrollment. I point this out because we've seen providers that have backed off of making changes because it won't let them into the enrollment and continue to submit on paper. You don't have to do that. Submit your initial in PECOS and then you are set up moving forward. But we're not going to be able to connect your existing enrollment information to your PECOS access from our end. It does require that application submission. Okay, so you select the change option. And again, this is going to be if you are a provider who has previously submitted through PECOS. You're going to get one of two options. The first option, it's going to ask you if you're adding a practice location in a different state or territory. And this is the verbiage that you're going to see. Or are you adding or changing your primary specialty provider type? That bullet is about maybe you have an organization that's going from a group practice to a clinical lab. You're changing your business type. Or you have an individual who was a non-physician and now they're going to become a physician. We have actually seen that particularly with physician assistants or some of our psychiatric providers. You might have a social worker who's now becoming a PhD. Just depends. Those are instances where the change is significant enough. You're submitting it as a change, but PECOS is going to create a new initial application. We have to create a separate enrollment. We cannot simply change an address if there's a change in jurisdictional state. We have to maintain that previous address and that previous enrollment in that previous jurisdictional state because providers have 1 year to bill. So we have to make sure we're maintaining that information. Same thing with specialty. The provider needs to be able to maintain anything that may have outstanding claims. From you'll be able to continue, it's not going to make you start over, but it is going to ask you for more information than just about what's changing. That's option one. Option two is adding a practice location in the same state or territory. So you want to make sure you're reading through these. If you're adding a practice location in the same state, that is truly just going to be a change and it's going to be a much smaller application. It will come in as a change to an existing provider PTAM. As will adding or updating reassignment information or any other changes, including special payments address, contact information. Uh, Maybe you're needing to change your electronic funds transfer, your EFT information. Those are all going to fall under option two. And in that case, you're only going to see the topics that need to be updated. So that's just a distinction of how PECOS handles those when you access those. Couple of things here with your first electronic submission. You want to make sure that you're very careful when answering a certain subset of questions, which is part of that questionnaire. First is the provider type. You need to make sure that you're selecting the appropriate provider type. Are you an organization? What kind of organization are you? For individuals, are you a physician or a non-physician? The reason is that specialties come up differently, and once you start an application, that provider type is not something that you as a provider or Max can change. If that is started incorrectly and submitted incorrectly, it will require us to delete the application and for the provider to start over. So please be very careful when you're selecting that provider type that it is accurately reflecting what's going on. Um, Complete the scenario questionnaire. It's going to customize that application for you. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Territory, that is going to be that jurisdictional state. That is one where Max can typically work with CMS to move an application to a different jurisdiction if it needs to be, but it does cause some delay for the application because Max cannot change that. That has to be something done on the CMS side. So please be careful about that. Make sure you're completing all topics. PECOS does have edits in place, and so it will warn you of anything that's required, or it'll cause an error. It'll warn you of anything that you may need that it's not seeing. So please pay attention to those. But just keep in mind with that initial application, you are going to need to make sure you're making the appropriate selections. And again, if you've never submitted electronically before, but you are an established provider, it is going to come through as an initial application, but it will be processed as a change. So just make sure you're looking through all of that. So some change application tips that I want to cover. Make sure you're reviewing your existing data. This is also with revalidations. Make sure you're covering anything that we currently have on file. If you're able to see your enrollment information because you're an established provider that's submitted electronically before, check all of that application information and make all of your changes all at once just to ensure that all of that information is accurate. Do not key over any existing information. This is something that happens quite a bit. If there's an address change, we will get applications where providers are just keying over the existing information. We need an end date. And that is because a practice location changes. Again, you have a year to bill for services at that practice location. And if you are keying over existing data, it removes it. and we no longer have it in history. So if you've submitted through PECOS before and gotten development, and we have asked you to put an address back in and then end date it and add the new address, that's why. We are actually required to develop to have that put in correctly. So if you're making a change to any information, end date it. What that does is it allows us to keep that information in history so that we can process claims that come in for the next year while that information is technically still valid. Um, Adding new information, it includes a new date, so a practice location. We need to know the start date of that practice location. With practice locations, one thing I want to point out, suite changes count. If there's a suite change, that's a new address. That's a situation where you need to end an address and add the new one. You will never key over anything to change anything in PECOS. That also applies to EFT information, so bank account information. It is everything to do with maintaining that history. So keep that in mind. If you've seen that development, that's why. Moving on to revalidations. So I mentioned a couple of places where under my associates you were actually able to start revalidations. You do also have what's called the revalidation center. This is going to be where you can see providers attached to the your enrollments that are up for revalidation. You can start the application from here as well. It is a little less efficient to come here than it is to go into their enrollment and start their revalidation. It's also not necessarily going to reflect the same date that's on the website. Again, this is here. You can utilize that, but that's really what this is. It just allows you to see who's up for revalidation and start revalidation applications. But it's not your only option. It's also not necessarily your most efficient. Let me go out to just going into our website and searching revalidation. So I want to get you the website. There is a revalidation due date, and I'm going to throw this in the chat. This website is your best bet for looking for those revalidation due dates. This is going to be the first location that's updated when those providers are up for revalidation. So you do have that. But you will also be able to see it eventually in PECOS. So for all of the situations that we just described, the initial enrollment, the change, the revalidation, you are going to get a scenario questionnaire. I've mentioned that a couple of times now where you have a questionnaire that's going to customize this application for you, and that happens at this point in the scenario questionnaire. At this point, you have given it the provider type, you've given it the territory, you've told it at a base level that you what kind of application you want to start, but now it needs to know a little bit about you as the provider. So on the left, what you're seeing is going to be the scenario question number one, and this is going to ask for information regarding what type of provider, what's the best description of your provider, whether that's an institutional provider, whether that's a clinic or organization, or if it's an individual provider. Once you get there, if you're an individual, you're going to see the next option, which is going to be, okay, are you a solo owner? Are you a sole proprietor? Are you a group member? Are you ordering and referring? Are you self-employed? And it's going to give you descriptions for all of this so that you can select the appropriate option. This is another one of those things that you're not going to be able to change after you acknowledge it on the next slide. We're going to talk about that. So please make sure that you are looking at these scenarios and selecting the one that makes the most sense for the application or enrollment action that you're taking. This is what that scenario acknowledgement looks like. Whether you're an organization or an individual, it's going to look similar. The difference is going to be what you see here in the bold text, and I'm hoping you can see my pointer there. But that is going to say, okay, based on the provider type that you told us, it'll also show you the state that's being submitted. This is your name. This is your uh, tax information, whether that's a social or corporate tax ID. This is the specialty you selected. This is the state. And this bold text here, this is what you're trying to do. In this instance, it's a reassignment of benefits. At this point, you could still go back and make changes if any of that is incorrect. However, the bottom of that slide or screenshot, you'll see that start application. Once you hit that start application button, this information is committed, the application is built. You cannot change that. You would need to delete the application and start over. So you do need to make sure that you're confirming who the provider is, the provider type, and the application intent, and you're confident in that choice before you move on to the start application piece. So we're going to talk about the submission process, but I do want to pause just for a moment and check in with Ashley to see if we have any questions in the chat so far.
Hey, Leanne, we've got a couple questions in the chat. The first one is, how can we clean up the associates section? Some of the entries are several years old and have been deactivated. Options does not always allow a delete file, or is there an archive that we could move them to?
The My Associates button, that is they've been deactivated. You can't necessarily remove them. If it's something that you no longer need access to as far as connections, it's something you can go into the identity and access system and remove the association. It doesn't delete the record. That information is housed on the Mac side of PECOS, and so that deactivated information is still there. You're able to see it because of the association that you have inside the identity and access button. And that can all be managed, and you can remove that. Once that removal happens, it should clean up that associates section for you. Now, if it's a reassignment, that's going to be something that's going to be visible. If you're an organization, you're going to be able to see those historic reassignments, and those won't go away. But if it sounds like you're looking at more the first level of that My Associates, and that would be through that identity and access. All right, Ashley,
Yeah.
next question.
All right, the next question is, how often do PECOS applications need to be done? And is it for the group NPI or individual doctors?
So I think based on how you're asking the question, you're asking about revalidations. That is typically every 5 years unless CMS identifies a need for an off-cycle revalidation. Those aren't common, and it usually has to do with either some regulatory change or some uptick in fraud activity for a given provider, provider type, or maybe a geographical area. So every 5 years, and then it is by enrollment record. So I say enrollment record because if you have a provider who's enrolled in, say, Michigan and Indiana, they're going to have to revalidate both the Michigan and the Indiana enrollment record, but they might not be at the same time. CMS and MACs work to identify who needs to revalidate every 5 years, and it's not based on tax ID or the individual provider social security number. It's based on the enrollment record, and we're asking to revalidate all the PTANs there. So along with that, if they revalidate a group, they may not be revalidating any of the members attached to the group because it's about the group's enrollment. If they revalidate members, they may not be asking the group to revalidate at that time because again, it's about that individual's enrollment ID. Ashley, any more questions before we go forward?
We did just have another one come in, and this one just asks if they let you know when it is due.
Ah, and again, that sounds like that's probably about revalidations, and they do. That website that I gave you will let you know if it says TBD, you're not up for revalidation yet, it will be updated. If there is a date, it will let you know. That date will be populated, and if it's a date in the past, that provider was up for revalidation. And if you ever have any questions, you can always call our customer service area. But when you're flagged for revalidation, you will receive a physical letter to the correspondence address on file if it's an individual. If it's an org, it may also go to the primary practice location and special payments address if it is different. So again, it's really important to make sure that address information is kept up to date, but they do send those out. And you'll typically be given 60 days to respond when it's time. Any other questions, Ashley?
That was the last one?
All right, so we'll move on with submitting an application. So once you have started your application and filled out the topics that are based on how you responded to that questionnaire, and here you are seeing what those topics will look like, and you'll see all of those completed check marks. That's how you're going to know you're ready for PECOS submission because you will have addressed all of those sections, all of those topics. All of the required sections, which would be this list, need to be completed. All errors need to resolve. You will have an errors and a warning tab when you're completing these. Errors you absolutely have to fix in order to submit your application. Warnings, you might have it, and if you do, you may want to submit it, but it won't hold you up from submitting your application. So you just want to work those errors and warnings and make sure you've cleaned that data up. The other way you're going to know you're ready to submit is at the top, you're going to have a percentage complete. If you are at 90%, you are ready to submit. If you're anything less than 90%, the system's missing something. There is an error. Something needs to be completed. Both of those, the check marks or that percentage, are going to activate the begin submission button, which is in that red box at the bottom of the screenshot that you see here. You will select begin submission to start the submission process. So simply completing the sections isn't submission. You have to begin a physical submission process. That is going to ask you a few questions. One, it's going to ask you if you have any documents that need to be uploaded. So in PECOS, you can upload things like licensure if it's needed, diplomas if they're needed, organizational charts, tax identification information, account verification, such as, say, like a voided check, if there's adverse legal actions. All of that can be uploaded and submitted with the electronic submission in PECOS, and then we as Max can attach that to the file without you having to physically send us anything. So you will upload the required documents. If you look here in the visual that's on the screen, you will select the document type and then it'll let you choose the file, much like navigating drives inside of your laptop, your computer. You'll grab the item and it will ask you to save it and upload it. Now there's a couple of requirements here. It does have to be in either a PDF or a TIFF format. It cannot be a JPEG or a GIF. It has to be in PDF or TIFF. If you submit any other format, you can't do a Word document. If any other format, PECOS is not going to actually upload it. It can't ingest those. There's also an issue with file size, or not an issue, but there's a limitation on file size. If you have multiple documents, you can combine them and submit it as one, as long as it is less than 10 megabytes. Anything bigger than that, PECOS does not have the capacity to upload that in a single file, and it may need to be broken down by whatever document it happens to be, but you can upload multiple documents. That is okay, and that is the method. If you have a document that's more than 10 megabytes, we need to make sure that it's smaller than that. The next step is going to be to sign the application. Just like paper applications, we do need a signature on electronic applications, attesting and certifying that everything is accurate and true to the best of their knowledge, and authorizing for the changes to happen, especially if you're in a situation where it's that group or that organization, someone signing on their behalf. PECOS will, based on the type of application that was submitted and the scenario that you agreed to, it will give you the signatures that are required, whether that's one signature or multiple. And it could vary. For instance, a reassignment is going to require two signatures, one from the provider and one from the authorized or delegated official. If you have an authorized delegated official, it will ask you who. It'll give you a drop-down list of the people that are eligible to sign. You can select, and then it will ask you for the signature. Here we are giving you uh, an example of what this would look like. And you can see that you can make selections to either electronically sign or upload a signature. So in the documents section, it'll give you a certification statement to print off and sign, or multiple if needed, to print off and sign, and then those can be uploaded. My recommendation is to e-sign wherever you can. It is the simplest and quickest way to do it. Also doesn't involve paper. So e-signing means you're signing now, and if you're signing for an individual practitioner through their enrollment, it's going to sign as they're submitting. If you have an authorized official or a delegated official, what's going to happen is you're going to say they're signing it electronically. It's going to send that person that's identified in the signature statement or the certification statement an email, and they're going to have 30 days to go in and sign it. And back at the beginning, we talked about the area in the homepage that talks about managing pending signatures. That's where they're going to access the applications. They have 72 hours to do it. And once they do that, we see that signature, we'll continue processing that. And we'll continue to check for that signature to come in. One thing I do want to point out though is providers do often ask, why are we getting development? We're still trying to get the electronic signature. That's because we're processing the application so quickly that we're reviewing it and seeing that that signature is pending prior to the signature being completed. And we are required by CMS to send out a development to start that 30-day development clock for that signature. However, we are checking the systems, particularly because of that 72-hour window. We're checking, and as soon as that signature is there, we start processing the application again, even if the provider hasn't sent a response to that development. But we do need to send that out. That is an unfortunate limitation of the current system, um, but we are aware of that, and that is why you're getting those. If when you're electronically signing, you are going to get a confirmation of submission. If you are uploading a signature, you will also get a confirmation of submission. Appending that signature and uploading that signature, if you're doing it off of the paper certifications, is going to trigger this. It's going to trigger the submission piece. You will get a confirmation, and the one on the left, that's the pop-up that's going to say that your application, along with any documentation that you uploaded, has been submitted to your Mac. Um, if there's anything additional that wasn't uploaded that we still need, and oftentimes this is signatures, it is telling you that that still needs to be mailed to your Mac. Um, I would recommend including the tracking number that you get if you are sending something outside of PECOS to us. That allows us to connect those two pieces of information uh, a lot more efficiently. However, I highly recommend doing everything through PECOS as much as you can. Fewer moving parts. On the right side, you are seeing the confirmation. You'll see your application progress is 100%, and it's telling you basically the same thing. The Mac has it, they will review it, and they're telling you to keep a copy of that tracking ID, and if there's anything that wasn't included in this electronic submission, make sure you get that into the Mac to avoid any delays. And at that point, it is in the Mac's hands. We will pick up that application. We will review it. If you submit something today, we are going to be able to see that tomorrow morning. And we do work applications in the order in which they're received. Again, with electronic applications, if they're clean, they have everything we need, we process them within 15 days. But you will also get an acknowledgement from us letting you know that we have received that. If there's development, you'll get a separate acknowledgement of that or request. So before I check in with Ashley for questions, here I have included a lot of links to those resources that we talked through today. So they are there. For the sake of time, though, I'm not going to go through these. I do want to check in with Ashley because I do see we have some questions in the chat. So Ashley, what questions do we have?
All right, we have a couple questions. The first one is, I have a question about the IRS status question. What should I select if my organization does not fit in one of the three options?
So if they're not one of the three options, if we're talking about the 501, the nonprofit, the corporation, the limited liability company situation, you want to pick the one that best indicates your option. It's not going to change the questions that you were asked unless you're asking about the disregarded entity or you're selecting the disregarded entity or the nonprofit. It asks some additional questions there. I would select that corporate structure. If it's completely different from that, then you're going to want to submit something in the documents, upload a document that explains the scenario. I'd also recommend looking to see if you're selecting the appropriate application type. Um, with that IRS documentation, you may actually fit into a slightly different provider type. Without knowing the specific situation, it's hard for me to tell you which option to do, but those would be my suggestions based on what's been asked.
In the end,
Ashley?
they did just
Oh,
add in, and I don't know if this helps or changes the
it
answer, that they're
does.
a
The
governmental
government.
entity.
I just saw that as you said that. So if you're a governmental entity, you're most likely going to fall into a nonprofit category. That's typically what we see. And then you can explain that. It's that tax exempt. But again, depending on how your governmental entity is set up, it could be a slightly different, but it typically is going to be that nonprofit government entity. Thank you for that addition.
Yeah. We have one more question if we have time to squeeze that one in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The last question is, can a person who is in I and A as authorized official but not listed in PECOS as an authorized official sign off attestation via e-signature in PECOS?
It's an excellent question. Um, The answer is potentially, and I'm going to expand upon that. One thing to keep in mind is the INA management system and PECOS do not talk, and that is intentional. The INA management is for user ID and password management only. It is not anything to do with the enrollment record. The authorized officials may or may be different in PECOS than they are in INA, but they may be the same. And because of that, all signers, all authorized officials for PECOS for the purpose of enrollment applications need to be added. So if they are in INA and not in PECOS anywhere, you're not going to be able to they're not going to be able to sign an application. However, if they also need to be an authorized official in PECOS, you can add them in the ownership and managing control topic of PECOS, and that will allow you to leverage them as a signer, but they're going to have to be added in PECOS separately. They don't get added automatically simply because they're the authorized official inside that INA system. So it's just an extra step. Again, there's some confusion with INA where providers believe that is connected to PECOS enrollment information, and it is not. INA is purely user ID and access, but you just need to add those authorized officials to PECOS. And some of that is because some organizations have multiple authorized officials, and INA generally only has one. Any other questions, Ashley?
That was the last question in the chat.
Okay. If you think of any questions, I am accepting questions, so you do have 7 days to submit those questions. If you think of anything, go ahead and send that to the email address that Ashley's going to be adding to the chat. Just make sure in the subject line you do put PECOS Basics, and that's going to allow the team members that are watching that mailbox know that, hey, I need to get this question to Leanne so she can get that answered for you. In the next couple of minutes, you are going to receive an email that's thanking you for attending today. Don't delete that without looking at it. That's your certificate of achievement. So if you're attending for CEUs, you're going to need that to submit to your accreditation or certification body. If you didn't get this, one of two things happened. You attended by phone and I can't verify your attendance systematically, or it went to your junk or spam folder. Send an email to our WPS Education mailbox, again with the title of today's session in the subject line, and include your phone number. I'll verify your attendance and I'll get you that certificate. Also in that email is going to be a link to our survey. And as I said before, we'd really appreciate hearing from you, including any topics that you would like to see in the future. But tell us what we did well, what we could do better, and what else you'd like to see. So I'll thank you now in advance for taking the time to do that. We do look at all of those and they're very important to what we do. So you can either use that link in that email or the link that Ashley's just placed in the chat. You're also going to receive a redirect when you leave. It's going to look like the image you see on your screen. It's not malicious. It's not anything. It's not taking you anywhere you don't want to go. It's just letting you know that you're leaving our webinar software and you're going into our CMS's Qualtrics survey software. With that, I do see one other question that I do want to address. I did see a question regarding WPS development. It's asking if there's a secure email address that we can return documents to. Typically, we don't recommend submitting anything with PHI or sensitive information in it. But what I will do, there is a general email. It's not necessarily a secure email. You're going to want to send everything encrypted in a zip file, but there is not a secure email or an option in the secure portal at this time to submit that documentation. You can fax it. That is secure and that does go directly in OnBase, and I'll send that fax number after the session today. So with that, on behalf of myself, Ashley, and everyone on the WPS Provider Outreach and Education team, I'd like to sincerely thank all of you for attending today. I know we're super busy and we went a little bit over, so thank you for hanging out with us. I hope you found this useful today. We look forward to seeing your survey comments and hope to see you in future education. Everybody have a great day. You may now disconnect.